The letter was yellowed, tucked in the back of my father's desk drawer like a secret he couldn't bear to share, but couldn't destroy either. I sat there, in the dim light of Bennett's Hardware's back office, the smell of sawdust and metal lingering in the air, my hands shaking as I read words that tore my world apart. My brother Daniel, the one I'd looked up to since I was a kid, had been stealing from our family store for years, siphoning money to cover his gambling debts. Worse, he'd forged documents to make it look like I was the one cooking the books. Me, Laura, the sister who'd stayed, who'd kept the store running when Dad got sick. The betrayal hit like a punch, raw and personal, leaving me gasping in the quiet of that empty office. I'm Laura Bennett, 38, with curly auburn hair that's always a mess, and a closet full of flannel shirts and jeans. The kind of clothes that say I'm more comfortable with a hammer than a hairbrush. I'm stubborn, loyal to a fault, and I've got a soft spot for the underdogs, the customers who come into the store looking for a single nail, or a part for a broken faucet, trusting me to help them fix what's broken. I've been running Bennett's Hardware in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, since Dad's cancer took him 2 years ago, pouring everything into keeping his dream alive. That store, with its creaky floors and shelves of bolts and paint cans, is my home, my legacy. Or it was, until I found that letter. It was 2025, a month after Dad's funeral, when the IRS audit notice arrived. A plain envelope that felt like a bomb. I'd been going through Dad's desk, looking for old tax records when I found the letter. It was in his handwriting, cramped and careful, detailing Daniel's gambling, the missing money, the forged invoices pointing to me. My stomach twisted as I read, my coffee mug forgotten on the desk, the steam curling into the air. I thought of Daniel, 42, tall and charming, with slicked back hair and a smile that could sell ice in a snowstorm. He was a part-time realtor, always chasing the next big deal, always talking about outdoing Dad's legacy. I'd believed in him, loved him, even when his promises fell through. But this was betrayal, on a level I couldn't fathom. I sat there, the store quiet except for the hum of the fluorescent lights, and felt anger surge, hot and sharp, like a fire I couldn't control. I thought of all the times Daniel had clapped me on the shoulder, calling me sis with that easy grin, the times we'd laughed over Mom's apple pie at Sunday dinners. It felt like a knife in my chest, each memory twisting the blade deeper. I wanted to call him, scream, demand why he'd done this, but my throat was tight, my hands trembling. Instead, I drove to Mom's house, the letter crumpled in my pocket, my old pickup rattling over Lancaster's back roads. Mom's house smelled like it always did, lavender and baked bread, a comfort that clashed with the storm inside me. Ellen, 67, was in the kitchen, her hands frail but busy, kneading dough for biscuits. She was sharp, always had been, but she clung to the idea of family like it was a lifeline, refusing to see the cracks. I didn't tell her about the letter. Not yet. I couldn't break her heart until I knew the truth. Instead, I found Daniel in the living room, flipping through his phone, his polished shoes propped on the coffee table. I asked him about the store's finances, keeping my voice steady but my hands were fists in my pockets. He looked up, his smile too quick, and said everything was fine, that I was worrying too much. But his eyes were cold, and when I mentioned the audit, he accused me of stirring up trouble, his voice sharp enough to cut. I left, my heart pounding, knowing he was lying. The drive back to my apartment was a blur, the fields of Lancaster stretching out under a gray sky. I thought about Dad, how he'd stand behind the store's counter, joking with customers, his apron stained with grease. I was 10, trailing him around, handing him wrenches, proud to be his shadow. "This place is ours, Laura," he'd say. "Yours and Daniel's." I'd believed him, believed in the family we were. Now, I felt like a fool. My apartment was small, cluttered with thrift store furniture and stacks of hardware catalogs. I sat on the couch, the letter in my hands, and cried for the first time since Dad's funeral. Not just for Daniel's betrayal, but for the family I thought we had. Days passed, and I couldn't let it go. I started digging into the store's records, staying late after closing, my eyes burning from spreadsheets. The numbers didn't lie. Thousands missing, funneled to accounts I didn't recognize. I found invoices with my name, signatures I'd never written. Each discovery was a fresh wound, but it also lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let Daniel erase me from Dad's legacy. I remembered Mom years ago, sitting me down after I'd failed a math test, her hands warm on mine. "You're tougher than you think, Laura. Keep going." I clung to that now, letting it push me forward. The turning point came a week later, when I found a second letter, hidden in Dad's old Mose system. It looks like the story was cut off mid-sentence. I'll continue from where it left off, ensuring the narrative flows seamlessly and adheres to the requirements for an emotionally rich cinematic story targeting an audience aged 40-65 plus. This part will be approximately 1,500 words, contributing to the overall goal of 8,500 words, and will maintain the first-person perspective, mature tone, and realistic details. Toolbox, the one he kept in the store's back room. It was rusted, heavy with years of use, and I'd only opened it to find a spare key. There, under a pile of old receipts, was another letter in Dad's shaky handwriting, dated just days before he died. It detailed Daniel's gambling debts, how he'd begged Dad to cover them, promising to stop. But Dad had also written about the forgeries, how Daniel planned to frame me if the store's finances were ever questioned. My breath caught, my fingers tracing his words, each one a wound. Dad had known, and he hadn't told me. Maybe he thought he was protecting me, or maybe he couldn't face the truth about his son. Either way, it felt like a second betrayal, softer but just as deep. I sat on the cold concrete floor, the toolbox open beside me, and felt the anger shift to something harder, more focused. I wasn't just fighting Daniel now. I was fighting for the truth, for Dad's legacy, for the part of me that still believed in family. I thought of the summers I'd spent in the store as a kid, stacking paint cans, Dad's laugh booming when I'd drop one. "You're learning, Laura," he'd say, ruffling my hair. I'd been learning ever since, but not about hardware, about loyalty, about what it costs to trust. I wasn't the quiet sister anymore, the one who fixed everyone's messes. I was done. I hired a forensic accountant named Carla, a woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense stare and a voice like gravel. She met me at a diner off Route 30, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt toast. Over pancakes she barely touched, she warned me that digging into the store's books could tank its reputation, maybe even close it. I nodded, my hands wrapped around my mug, the heat grounding me. I didn't care about the risk. I needed to clear my name, to save what Dad had built. Carla agreed to help, her eyes softening when I told her about Dad, about the store being all I had left of him. We worked for weeks, meeting after hours in the store's back office, the air thick with the smell of oil and wood. Carla was methodical, piecing together bank records, forged invoices, even texts Daniel thought he'd deleted. Each discovery was a brick in the wall I was building, but it also hurt, like pulling stitches from a wound. I found withdrawals linked to a casino in Atlantic City, payments to bookies, all hidden under my name. I'd lie awake at night in my apartment, the streetlights casting shadows on my ceiling, wondering how Daniel could look me in the eye, call me sis, while planning to throw me under the bus. I kept it from Mom, not wanting to break her until I had proof. She'd call me over for dinner, her voice bright, asking about the store, about Daniel's latest real estate pitch. I'd force a smile, cutting her meatloaf, the taste of it heavy with memories of better days. I remembered being 12, sitting at that same table, Daniel sneaking me an extra slice of pie when Mom wasn't looking. He'd been my hero then, the big brother who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd promised to always have my back. Now, I saw him for what he was, desperate, weak, willing to sacrifice me to save himself. The work with Carla consumed me, but I kept the store running, helping customers, restocking shelves, my hands busy to keep my mind from spiraling. One afternoon an old man came in, looking for a specific bolt for his tractor. His hands were gnarled, his eyes kind, and he told me he'd been coming to Bennett's since Dad was a boy. I smiled, ringing him up, but inside I was breaking. This was what I was fighting for, the trust of people like him, the legacy Dad had left. I couldn't let Daniel take it. The turning point came when Carla found a hidden account, one Daniel had used to funnel money to a loan shark named Vince Russo. It was the final piece, tying his gambling to the store's losses. I sat there, staring at the numbers, my coffee cold, and felt a shift. The pain was still there, but it was fuel now, driving me to act. I hired a lawyer, a guy named Pete, who worked out of a small office in downtown Lancaster. He was scrappy, believed in me, and didn't sugarcoat the odds. He said we could clear my name, maybe even press charges, but it'd be a fight, one that'd drag the store's name through the mud. I told him to do it. I wasn't backing down. I started noticing things after that. A car parked too long outside the store, a man watching me from across the street, his face hidden by a cap. I told myself I was paranoid, but I wrote down license plates, kept my doors locked. I didn't tell Mom, but I confided in Carla, who said loan sharks like Vince didn't take kindly to debts going unpaid. The fear was there, a low hum, but I pushed it down, focusing on the case. I thought of Dad, how he'd stand at the store's counter, calm even when customers complained. "Stay steady, Laura," he'd say. I was trying. The plan came together at a town hall meeting, one of those Lancaster gatherings where everyone pretends to care about zoning laws while gossiping over coffee. Daniel was there, schmoozing locals for his real estate gigs, his charm on full display. I'd tipped off Pete, who'd arranged for Carla to present our findings. I stood in the back, my flannel shirt damp with sweat, watching as Carla took the mic. She laid out the numbers, missing money, forged documents, my name cleared. The room went quiet, Daniel's smile freezing, his eyes darting to me. He tried to laugh it off, saying it was a misunderstanding, but the crowd wasn't buying it. I stepped forward, my voice steady, and told them about Dad's letter, about the store being my home. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. I'd won. As I left, Mom pulled me aside, her eyes wet, her hands trembling. She said she'd suspected something was wrong, but couldn't face it, couldn't lose another piece of her family. I hugged her, my throat tight, but the victory felt heavy. The store was safe. Daniel faced fraud charges, but the family I'd loved was fractured. I drove home, the Lancaster fields dark under a starless sky, my truck's radio off. I thought about Dad, how he'd smell of sawdust and coffee, how he'd trusted me to carry on. I was, but it wasn't the way I'd imagined. When I got to my apartment, my phone lit up with a voicemail from an unknown number. I played it, my heart pounding, expecting Daniel, or maybe Vince. But it was a man's voice, low and unfamiliar, saying, "You've only scratched the surface, Laura." I stood there, the phone cold in my hand, my breath shallow. The store was safe. My name was clear. But something else was out there. Something Dad had hidden. I thought of his toolbox. The letters. The secrets he'd kept. What else was waiting for me? I stood there, the phone still in my hand, the voicemail's words looping in my mind like a song I couldn't shake. "You've only scratched the surface, Laura." The voice was calm, deliberate, and it sent a chill through me, not just for what it said, but for what it implied. Dad had hidden more than Daniel's betrayal, and now someone else knew. I locked my apartment door, checked the windows, my hands moving on autopilot. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge. None of it felt safe anymore. I sat on my couch, the voicemail playing again, and wondered what I'd stumbled into. Was it Vince? The loan shark? Someone tied to Daniel? Or something deeper? Something Dad had buried so well even Mom didn't know. I didn't sleep that night. I made tea, the chamomile kind Mom always swore by, but it sat untouched, the steam fading into the dark. I kept thinking about Dad, his steady hands sorting nails in the store, his laugh when I'd misplace a wrench. I was 15, trailing him on a delivery to a farm, the truck bouncing over dirt roads, him telling me, "Family's everything, Laura, but it's not always easy." I'd nodded, not really listening, too young to understand. Now, his words felt like a warning I'd missed. I pulled out the letters again, reading them under the glow of my lamp, searching for clues. There was nothing new, just Daniel's debts, my forged name, Dad's quiet despair. But the voicemail gnawed at me, a loose thread I couldn't leave alone. Morning came, grey and damp, the Lancaster air heavy with the promise of rain. I drove to the store, my truck's wipers smearing the drizzle, my eyes scanning the rear view for that car I'd seen before. It wasn't there, but the unease stayed, a weight in my chest. The store was quiet, just me and the morning deliveries, the smell of fresh lumber grounding me. I restocked shelves, helped a customer find a drill bit, my hands busy while my mind raced. I called Pete, my lawyer, and played him the voicemail. His voice was steady, but I heard the edge in it when he told me to save it, to watch my back. He said he'd pass it to a detective he knew, see if they could trace the number. I thanked him, but I knew the police wouldn't move fast, not for a vague threat in a town where petty theft was the biggest crime. I called Carla next, meeting her at the same diner, the one with the sticky booths and the waitress who called everyone Hun. She looked tired, her glasses slipping down her nose, but she listened as I told her about the voicemail, the car, the feeling of being watched. She leaned back, her coffee mug cradled in her hands, and said Vince Russo wasn't the type to leave cryptic messages. He'd be direct, maybe violent, but not subtle. This felt personal, she said. Like someone who knew the store, knew Dad. Her words stuck with me, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I asked if she'd look into the store's older records, anything from before I took over. She nodded, her eyes sharp, and said she'd dig, but it'd take time. I went back to the store, my routine a lifeline. I helped an older woman pick out paint for her kitchen, her chatter about her grandkids a brief escape. But when she left, the silence closed in, and I found myself staring at Dad's toolbox, the one where I'd found the second letter. I opened it again, my hands trembling, searching for anything I'd missed. There was nothing, just tools, receipts, a faded photo of me and Daniel as kids, grinning in front of the store's sign. I held it, my throat tight, remembering that day, the way Daniel had carried me on his shoulders, promising to buy me ice cream. Was that brother gone even then, or had life twisted him into someone I didn't know? I kept the store running, but I was careful now, locking the back door, checking the windows before I left. I stopped parking in the same spot, Varied my routes home. I didn't tell Mom, not wanting to worry her, but I saw the strain in her face when I visited, the way her hands shook as she poured coffee. She asked about Daniel, her voice soft, saying he'd called. Sounded sorry. I nodded, stirring my mug, but didn't tell her about the voicemail. I couldn't. Not until I knew what it meant. I thought of her garden, the way she'd kneel in the dirt, coaxing roses to bloom. Some things need time to grow, Laura, she'd say. I was trying to give her time, but it felt like lying. One night, I was closing up when I saw the car again, parked across the street, a dark sedan with tinted windows. My heart skipped, but I didn't run. I stood in the doorway, staring at it, my keys digging into my palm. It didn't move, just sat there. Engine off, a silent threat. I locked the store, walked to my truck, my chin up, refusing to show fear. When I drove away, it didn't follow, but I knew it wasn't gone. I called Carla, told her to hurry with the records. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt it, like a storm on the horizon. A week later, Carla called me to the diner, her laptop open, papers spread across the table. She'd found something, a series of payments, small but regular, from the store's account to a company called Meridian Holdings, starting 10 years ago and stopping when Dad got sick. The company didn't exist. Not really. Just a P.O. box and a name. Carla said it looked like a shell, a way to move money, but she couldn't tie it to Daniel. My hands went cold, the diner's noise fading. Was this what Dad was hiding? I remembered him at the store, late at night, his desk lamp on, his face tight when I'd ask what he was doing. "Just paperwork, Laura," he'd say. But now I wondered. I drove to Mom's house, needing answers. She was in her rocking chair, a quilt over her lap, the TV murmuring in the background. I asked about Meridian, keeping my voice soft, but her eyes widened, her hands stilling. She said it was nothing, just an old supplier, but her voice shook, and I knew she was lying. I pressed, hating myself for it, and she admitted Dad had handled private business with a man named Frank Kessler, someone from his past. She didn't know details, just that Dad said it was to protect us. I left, my heart heavy, the name Frank Kessler burning in my mind. I called Pete, gave him the name, and he said he'd dig. But that night, alone in my apartment, I felt the weight of it all. Daniel's betrayal, Dad's secrets, Mom's silence. I thought of the store, the way it smelled of wood and metal, the way it held my family's story. I wasn't just fighting for it now. I was fighting for the truth, whatever it cost. As I drifted to sleep, my phone buzzed. Another voicemail from that unknown number. I played it, my breath shallow, expecting the same voice. But it was different. A woman this time. Her tone sharp. "Leave it alone, Laura, or you'll lose more than the store." I sat up, the dark pressing in, and knew I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. I sat there, the phone trembling in my hand, the woman's voice echoing in the dark of my apartment. "Leave it alone, Laura, or you'll lose more than the store." It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise, sharp and cold, like a blade pressed to my skin. I played the voicemail again, searching for clues in her tone, but it was clipped, professional, someone used to giving orders. My heart pounded, but I didn't cry, didn't panic. The fear was there, a tight knot in my chest, but so was something else. Resolve hard and unyielding. I'd come too far, uncovered too much to back down now. I thought of Dad, his steady gaze as he'd hand me a wrench, saying, "Fix what's broken, Laura, even when it's hard." This was hard, maybe the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I wasn't stopping. I got up, made coffee, the bitter smell grounding me as the first light crept through my blinds. My apartment was a mess. Hardware catalogs stacked on the counter, a half-eaten sandwich from yesterday, a flannel shirt draped over a chair. It was home, but it felt like a battlefield now, every shadow a reminder of the voicemails, the sedan, the secrets piling up. I wrote down what I knew. Frank Kessler, Meridian Holdings, the payments Dad had hidden. I didn't know how they connected to Daniel's betrayal, but they were pieces of the same puzzle, and I was determined to solve it. I thought of Mom, her hands shaking as she'd mentioned Kessler, and wondered what else she was holding back. I couldn't ask her, not yet. She was too fragile, her heart already bruised by Daniel's arrest. I drove to the store, the Lancaster roads quiet, the fields stretching out under a heavy sky. The store felt different now, its creaky floors and shelves of nails, less like a sanctuary and more like a vault, hiding truths I wasn't sure I wanted to find. I opened early, needing the routine to keep me steady. A farmer came in, looking for a chain for his gate, his boots tracking mud across the floor. I helped him, my hands moving automatically, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the woman's voice, wondering who she was. Vince Russo's people, someone tied to Kessler. I smiled at the farmer, rang him up, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, watching for that sedan. I called Carla, told her about the voicemail, the woman's threat. She met me at the diner, her laptop already open, her coffee black and untouched. She said she'd traced Meridian Holdings to a defunct address in Philly, but the name Frank Kessler popped up in old business records, linked to a construction firm that went bust in the 90s. She didn't know more, but she warned me to be careful, her voice low as she glanced at the diner's door. She said people like Kessler didn't stay in the shadows unless they had something to hide. I nodded, my hands wrapped around my mug, the heat doing nothing to ease the chill inside me. I asked her to keep digging, to look for any link to Dad or the store. She agreed, but her eyes were worried, and I knew she felt it too. The sense that we were wading into something bigger than we'd expected. I went back to the store, my hands busy with inventory, my mind racing. I kept thinking about Dad, how he'd sit in the back office late at night, his desk lamp casting shadows on the wall. I was 16, sneaking in after a date, catching him hunched over papers, his face tight. "Go to bed, Laura," he'd said, but there was a strain in his voice I hadn't understood. Now, I wondered if he'd been hiding Kessler's secrets even then, protecting us from something he couldn't face. I opened his toolbox again, searching for anything I'd missed, but it was just tools and dust. The photo of me and Daniel still there, our kids' smiles mocking me. I slipped it into my pocket, not sure why, just needing to hold on to something real. I didn't tell Mom about the voicemail, but I visited her, needing to see her, to anchor myself. She was in her garden, her hands in the dirt, coaxing tulips to grow. She looked up, her eyes soft, and asked if I'd heard from Daniel. I shook my head, stirring the stew she'd made, the smell of thyme and carrots pulling me back to childhood Sundays, all of us around the table, laughing. I wanted to ask about Kessler again, but her hands were trembling, and I couldn't push her. Instead, I helped her weed, the earth cool under my fingers, and listened as she talked about Dad, how he'd loved the store but worried it'd never be enough for us. I nodded, my throat tight, and wondered if she knew more than she was saying. That night, I was locking up the store when I saw the sedan again, parked under a streetlight, its engine off. My heart skipped, but I didn't flinch. I stood there, keys in hand, staring at it, daring it to move. It didn't, but I felt eyes on me, a weight I couldn't shake. I drove home, my truck's radio off, my eyes flicking to the rear view. No one followed, but I locked my door, Checked the windows, my pepper spray on the nightstand. I lay awake, the voicemail's words looping, ascended, but I wasn't sleeping. I thought of Dad, his voice steady. "You're stronger than you know, Laura." I wanted to believe him, but I felt small, caught in a game I didn't understand. The next day Pete called. He'd found Kessler, or at least a trace. A man in his 70s, living in a retirement home in Philly. His name tied to a lawsuit from the 90s. Something about fraud. He said the police were looking into him, but it'd take time. I thanked him, my hands shaking, and called Carla, telling her to focus on Kessler's past, any link to Dad. She said she'd try, but her voice was tight, like she knew we were close to something dangerous. I went to the store, helped a customer find a wrench, my hands steady but my mind racing. I kept seeing the sedan in my mind, the woman's voice, Dad's letters. I was close, but to what? That evening I went to Mom's, needing her, needing something solid. She was knitting, her hands slow, her eyes distant. I asked about Kessler again, softly, and she froze, her needles still. She said he'd been Dad's friend, years ago, someone who'd helped the store when it nearly closed. But her voice cracked, and she admitted Dad had cut ties with him, said he was trouble. I pressed, asking why, and she looked at me, her eyes wet, saying, "Some secrets are better left buried, Laura." I hugged her, my heart heavy, and left, the night air cold, the stars hidden by clouds. As I got to my truck, my phone buzzed. A text, not a voicemail, from an unknown number. "Kessler's not your problem. Stop now." My breath caught, my hands trembling as I looked around, the street empty but heavy with eyes I couldn't see. I drove home, my heart pounding, and knew I couldn't stop, not even if it broke me. Dad's secrets, Daniel's betrayal, the store. They were mine to carry, and I wasn't letting go. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the text burning in my mind. "Kessler's not your problem. Stop now." The words were a warning, sharper than the woman's voicemail, and they followed me as I drove through Lancaster's quiet streets, the town's lights blurring into streaks. My truck rattled, the familiar hum doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting the sedan to appear, but the roads were empty, the night heavy with a silence that felt like it was holding its breath. I got to my apartment, locked the door, and stood there, my pepper spray in one hand, my phone in the other. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't call Pete or Carla. I just sat on my couch, the darkness pressing in, and let the weight of it all settle. Dad's secrets, Daniel's betrayal, Kessler's shadow, they were a knot I had to untangle, no matter what it cost. Morning came, sluggish and gray, the air damp with the promise of rain. I made coffee, the smell sharp, pulling me back to a memory of Dad in the store's break room, pouring me a cup when I was 17, saying, "You're gonna run this place someday, Laura. Make it yours." I'd laughed, thinking it was years away, but now here I was, fighting to keep his dream alive. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm in my hands, and checked my phone. No new messages, but the text from last night was still there, a silent threat. I saved it, sent a screenshot to Pete, and got ready for the day, my flannel shirt and jeans feeling like armor. The store was my refuge even now. I opened early, the bell above the door jingling as I flipped the sign. I restocked shelves, the clink of nails and bolts a rhythm I could lose myself in. A regular came in, an older guy named Henry, looking for screws for a porch swing. He chatted about the weather, his grandkids, and I nodded, smiling, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the street. Henry noticed, his brow furrowing, and asked if I was okay. I brushed it off, said I was just tired, but his kindness stuck with me. A reminder of why the store mattered. The people, the trust, the community Dad had built. I called Carla, needing her steady voice. We met at the diner, the smell of bacon and syrup thick in the air. She looked worn, her glasses smudged, but she had news. She'd found a link between Kessler and a man named Robert Tate, a Philly businessman who'd been investigated for money laundering in the 90s. Kessler had worked for him, handling special projects, and Tate's name appeared in old store records, tied to a loan Dad had taken to keep the store afloat. Carla said it was a long shot, but the payments to Meridian Holdings might have been Dad repaying Tate. Or worse, funneling money for him. My stomach twisted, the diner's noise fading. Was Dad involved in something illegal? I thought of his late nights, the tension in his shoulders, and wondered what he'd carried to protect us. I drove back to the store, my hands tight on the wheel, the Lancaster field stretching out under a bruised sky. I kept thinking about Mom, her shaky voice when she'd mentioned Kessler, her plea to let secrets stay buried. I couldn't. Not now. I needed to know who Tate was, what he'd meant to Dad, and why someone, maybe Tate, maybe Kessler, was still watching me. I called Pete, told him about Tate, and he said he'd dig, but his voice was cautious, like he knew we were stepping into deep water. He warned me to stay safe, to avoid poking around alone. I agreed, but inside, I was already planning my next move. That afternoon, I went through Dad's old files, ones I'd ignored in the chaos of Daniel's betrayal. They were stuffed in a cabinet, yellowed and smelling of dust, receipts and contracts from the store's early days. I found a loan agreement signed by Dad and Robert Tate, dated 1995, the year the store nearly closed. It was standard, nothing suspicious, but a handwritten note in the margin caught my eye. "Keep it quiet, Frank." My heart skipped. Kessler again. I kept digging, finding a photo tucked in a folder. Dad and a man I didn't recognize, both younger, standing outside the store, their smiles tight. I slipped it into my pocket, my hands shaking, and knew I had to find Kessler. I didn't tell Mom, but I visited her, needing her warmth, even if I couldn't tell her everything. She was in her kitchen baking cookies, the smell of vanilla and sugar wrapping around me like a hug. She asked about the store, her eyes searching mine, and I lied, said things were fine. I hated it, but I saw the strain in her face, the way her hands trembled as she stirred batter. I remembered being 8, sitting on that counter licking a spoon, her laugh soft as she'd say, "You're my helper, Laura." I wanted to be that girl again, safe in her kitchen, but I wasn't. I hugged her, promising to come back soon, and left, the photo of Dad and the stranger heavy in my pocket. That night, I was closing the store when I saw the sedan again, parked across the street, its windows dark. My pulse quickened, but I didn't run. I locked the door, stared at it, my keys digging into my palm. It didn't move, but I felt its presence, a shadow that wouldn't let go. I drove home, my truck's engine rumbling, my eyes flicking to the rear view. No one followed, but I checked my locks, kept my pepper spray close. I sat on my couch, the photo in my hands, and studied the stranger's face. Sharp cheekbones, a thin smile. Was he Tate? Kessler? I didn't know, but I felt him, a ghost from Dad's past, reaching for me. The next day, Pete called with a lead. Kessler was still in that Philly retirement home, but he'd had visitors recently, one matching Tate's description. Pete said the police were watching, but they needed more to act. I thanked him, my heart pounding, and decided to go to Philly myself. I didn't tell Carla or Pete, knowing they'd try to stop me. I packed a bag, left a note for Mom saying I'd be gone a day, and drove, the highway stretching out under a slate-gray sky. I thought of Dad, his voice in my ear. "Fix what's broken, Laura." I was trying, but every step felt like walking toward a cliff. I got to the retirement home, a squat building with peeling paint, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and old carpet. I asked for Kessler, my voice steady, saying I was a family friend. The nurse led me to a common room, where an old man sat by a window, his hair white, his eyes sharp despite his age. He looked at me, his gaze cutting, and said my name before I could speak. My breath caught, but I sat, my hands clasped, and asked about Dad, about Tate, about Meridian. He smiled, thin and cold, and said, "You're just like your father, Laura. Too stubborn for your own good." My heart stopped, and I knew I'd found the truth, or at least the edge of it. Kessler's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, as I sat across from him in the retirement home's common room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting shadows on his lined face, his eyes glinting with something between amusement and warning. "You're just like your father, Laura. Too stubborn for your own good." My pulse thrummed, but I didn't look away. I'd driven to Philly, walked into this place, and faced him, all to uncover what Dad had hidden. I wasn't leaving without answers, even if they hurt. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tight, and asked again about Robert Tate, Meridian Holdings, and why someone was threatening me. Kessler's smile faded, and for a moment he looked tired, like a man carrying too many years of secrets. He spoke slowly, his voice low, saying Dad had been desperate in the 90s, the store on the brink of closing. Tate, a businessman with a knack for bending rules, offered a loan, but it came with strings. Dad funneled money through Meridian Holdings, a shell company, to repay Tate's investors. Men Kessler wouldn't name, but hinted were tied to Philly's underbelly. Dad didn't know the full scope, Kessler said, just enough to keep the store alive. But when Dad tried to cut ties, Tate leaned on him, using Kessler to keep him in line. The payments stopped when Dad got sick, and Tate moved on. But Kessler said my digging had stirred things up, made Tate nervous. The voicemails, the sedan, they were warnings, not from Kessler, but from Tate's people, trying to scare me off. I sat back, my chest tight, the room's antiseptic smell choking me. Dad, my hero, the man who'd taught me to fix things, had been tangled in something dirty. I thought of him at the store, his apron stained, his laugh warm, and wondered how he'd carried that weight. Kessler watched me, his eyes softening, and said Dad had done it for us. For me, Daniel, Mom. I wanted to believe him, but the truth was a bruise, deep and aching. I asked about the woman's voice, the texts, and Kessler shook his head, saying Tate had plenty of loyalists, people who'd do his bidding. He didn't know names, or wouldn't say. As I stood to leave, he grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, and said, "Let it go, Laura. Tate's not someone you cross." I pulled away, my heart pounding, and walked out. The photo of Dad and the stranger, Tate, I was sure now, burning in my pocket. I drove back to Lancaster, the highway a blur, my mind racing. The store was safe. Daniel was facing charges, but Tate was a shadow I couldn't shake. I called Pete, told him everything, my voice steady despite the fear. He said he'd pass it to the detective, see if they could link Tate to the threats. But he warned me it'd be hard. Men like Tate were ghosts, untouchable. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in my truck. The Lancaster fields dark around me. I thought of Mom, her roses, her trembling hands, and knew I couldn't tell her, not yet. But I couldn't stop either. I'd cleared my name, saved the store, but Dad's secrets were mine now, and I had to face them. I went to the store the next day, needing its familiar chaos. Customers, deliveries, the clink of coins in the register. Carla called, saying she'd found more on Tate. Old records tying him to a fraud case that never stuck. She said the police were interested, but it'd take time. I nodded into the phone, helping a kid pick out a hammer, my hands moving while my mind spun. I kept seeing Kessler's face, Tate's smile in the photo, Dad's letters. I thought of Daniel, in jail now, his charm useless, and wondered if he'd known about Tate, if he'd been part of it. I didn't want to believe it, but I didn't trust my own heart anymore. I hired a new clerk, a young woman named Sarah with a quick smile and a knack for organizing, letting her take over some of my shifts. The store was thriving, customers loyal, the audit behind us. But I was different, sharper, less willing to assume the best. I visited Mom, helped her in the garden, her hands steadier now. She asked about Daniel, her voice soft, and I told her he was okay. A half-truth that tasted bitter. I didn't mention Tate, but I saw the question in her eyes, the fear she wouldn't voice. I hugged her, the smell of her lavender soap pulling me back to being 10, safe in her arms. I wasn't that girl anymore, but I carried her with me, her hope tempered by my scars. Weeks passed, and the threats stopped. Pete said the police had questioned Tate, found nothing concrete, but the attention spooked him. The sedan didn't show, the voicemails didn't come. I should have felt relieved, but it was quieter, like the calm after a storm you know isn't done. I kept the store running, trained Sarah, laughed with customers, but I checked my locks, kept my pepper spray close. One night I was closing up when I found a note slipped under the door, handwritten, no signature. "You're safe now. Don't look back." My breath caught, but I didn't call Pete. I burned it in my sink, watching the flames curl, and felt a weight lift. Not all of it, but enough. I drove to the fields one evening, parked by a barn Dad used to supply. The air thick with the smell of hay and earth. The sun was setting, painting the sky in pinks and golds, and I stood there, my boots sinking into the dirt. I thought of Dad, his secrets, his love. I thought of Daniel, broken by his own choices. I thought of Mom, her roses blooming despite it all. I'd lost the family I'd known, the trust I'd held, but I'd found something too, a strength I hadn't known I had, a clarity that felt like home. The store was mine, not just Dad's dream, but my own, built on truth, not lies. As I got back in my truck, my phone buzzed. I froze, expecting another threat, but it was Carla, checking in, her voice warm. I smiled, said I was okay, and meant it mostly. I drove home, the stars bright above the fields, and felt the past settle. Not gone, but quieter. I'd faced Daniel's betrayal, Dad's secrets, Tate's shadow, and I was still standing. I thought of Mom's garden, how she'd coax life from hard soil, and knew I was doing the same, one day at a time. But as I parked, I saw a figure by the store, just for a moment, then gone. My heart skipped, but I didn't chase it. I locked my truck, walked to my door, my chin up. Maybe it was nothing, a trick of the light. Or maybe it was a reminder that some secrets never fully die. Either way, I was ready, my hands steady, my heart my own.